Mark Ruffalo's car broke down outside Los Angeles, in front of a small repair shop with a rusty sign. He was expecting only a quick check and a fast repair. But inside, under the dim fluorescent lights, there was an old man working quietly. He didn't speak, but his hands, stained with oil, spoke volumes. Even after Mark left in his car, the image of that man stayed with him. His tired yet proud posture, his lonely yet upright stance. A week later, Mark returned to thank him. But when he arrived, the garage was dark. The doors were locked, the windows empty. What he heard next stopped him in his tracks. Before continuing the story, write in the comments where you watched the video. And if you enjoy these real-life stories, subscribe to Legacy Light Stories. As the sun slowly set over Los Angeles, the city was bathed in a golden glow. On the outskirts of the city, in a time-forgotten auto repair shop, Henry Carter wiped the grease from his hands with a rag and sighed. At 72 years old, Henry had spent his entire life in this garage. Big chains had come and gone, but his old-fashioned shop was still standing. People didn't trust luxury, they trusted Henry's word. But trust, unfortunately, didn't pay the hospital bills. Henry put his hand on his chest and wrinkled his face slightly. He had been feeling a heaviness lately, but he still attributed it to fatigue. That night, as he was about to close the shop, the rumbling sound of an engine shook the walls of the garage. Henry turned his head. A dark red Ferrari slowly came to a stop under the lights. Such a car belonged in a Beverly Hills showroom, not his oil-smelling workshop. The engine coughed once more and fell silent. The door opened. A tall, well-built man stepped out, wearing a simple black leather jacket and dark jeans. When he took off his sunglasses, his face came into view. Not harsh, but warm. He looked like he'd stepped out of a movie set, not a dusty garage, but his voice was soft. "Hey, master, can you take a look?" Henry looked at the car, then at the man. The face seemed familiar, but he couldn't place it. He thought to himself, "This is probably some rich guy's toy. It doesn't interest me much." Henry shook his head, muttering to himself, "Too flashy for my taste." The man smiled slightly. "Maybe so. But in the end, a car is a car, isn't it, master?" Henry raised his eyebrows and smiled sarcastically. "An engine is an engine." Without further ado, he took his old toolbox and opened the hood. With his oily hands, he bent over the engine skillfully. He still hadn't noticed that the man standing in front of him was Mark Ruffalo. He bent down, listened, and checked the cables. Every movement was like a habit. The man stood at the edge of the garage, watching Henry's movements intently. His hands were in his pockets, his posture was relaxed, but there was genuine interest on his face. "Do you always work alone?" he asked gently. Henry replied, his voice rough but not harsh. "These days, no one knows how to fix things. Everyone just replaces the part and takes the money." The man nodded, a hint of respect in his eyes. "You're right. I value true craftsmanship." Henry responded with a short grunt. "You're one of the few, then." With those words, he felt a sudden pang in his chest. A brief frown, but he hid it quickly. After all, the engine still wasn't working, and his job wasn't done yet. The man approached him, curious to see what Henry was doing. Henry muttered as if talking to himself, "I understand the problem. I'll fix it in a few minutes." But what he didn't know at that moment was that the man in front of him had entered his life not just for this engine, but for a completely different reason. The air in the garage was heavy. It smelled of oil, metal, old fabric, and hard work. Despite his age, Henry bent over the engine with agile movements, carefully working on a part with the screwdriver in his hand. Mark stood in the corner, watching him silently. He watched the scene with a strange inner peace. Henry had seen many wealthy customers like this. They loved their cars but didn't even know what a spark plug was for. But there was something different about this man. He wasn't judging. He was listening. Henry thought to himself, "Everything is electronic now. You don't feel the engine's pulse or connect with the machine anymore." The man bowed his head and smiled. "I admire people who love their work." Henry sniffed. "Then you're in the wrong place, son." The man laughed. "I'm a city boy," he said. But his voice wasn't mocking, more like a sincere acceptance. Henry leaned closer to the engine and carefully tightened a belt with the wrench in his hand. This scene seemed ordinary to him, But the pressure inside him was growing with every passing minute. His breathing grew heavy. There was a weight on his chest, but he didn't even consider leaving the job half done. As always, the car's problem would be solved first, and as always, no one would notice his fatigue. While Henry was fiddling with the keys, the man came over genuinely curious. "You've been doing this for a long time, haven't you?" Henry didn't even look up. "Almost 50 years. I opened the shop in 1974. I've been here ever since." The man nodded. "That's rare these days. People don't dedicate their lives to one thing anymore." Henry wiped the grease from his hands with a rag and looked at the man carefully. "And you? What do you do?" The man smiled slightly. "I'm in the entertainment industry." Henry raised his eyebrows slightly. "Music? Movies?" The man paused briefly. "Movies?" Henry muttered under his breath. "A Hollywood guy driving a Ferrari. It's always the same." The man laughed, seemingly unfazed. No, it's not mine. I borrowed it from a friend. But I really love cars." Henry narrowed his eyes in approval. "At least you respect them. For most rich people, they're just toys to show off." The smile faded a little from the man's face, but he nodded sincerely. "I've never been interested in trophies." Henry turned back to the engine, picked up an English wrench, but at that moment, he felt a sharp burning in his chest. The pain spread to his ribs and his breath caught for a moment. His vision grew slightly blurry, but Henry didn't let it show. He clenched his teeth. He'd felt this before. Not now, he thought. He pulled himself together and tightened the last bolt. The engine was ready, and that was enough for him. Henry stepped back and wiped the sweat from his forehead. "All right, let's give it a try." The man got into the car and turned the key. The engine roared to life. It was powerful and clean. Henry crossed his arms and nodded slightly. "It's done." The man listened to the engine, a satisfied smile on his face. He got out of the car and took out his wallet. "How much do I owe you?" Henry shook his head. "Nothing. It's enough that it works." The man was surprised. "Are you sure?" Henry waved him off. "It was easy. If it breaks down again, just stop by." The man looked at Henry for a moment, then smiled warmly. "All right," he said. "I'll bring you a coffee next time I'm around." Henry smiled. "Don't bring that expensive Starbucks coffee, though," he said teasingly. The man laughed, got into his car, and rolled down the window. "See you, Mr. Carter." Henry just grunted. As the man drove away, Henry watched him. He still didn't know who he had helped, or how it would change his life. As he prepared to turn off the garage lights, he felt a tightness in his chest again. For a moment, he held onto the doorframe. Then he took a deep breath and turned off the dim light. Today was over. Tomorrow was another day. But this time, it would be different, because the stranger he didn't know had already started making plans. Mark Ruffalo was driving through the streets of Los Angeles to the sound of a Ferrari's engine. But his mind wasn't on the road. It was on Henry Carter. The cool night air gently caressed Mark's face. His hands were steady on the steering wheel, but his mind was elsewhere. He was still thinking about Henry Carter, an old, stubborn but sincere man, the kind of person you don't come across easily in this city. Mark had met hundreds of people in his life: directors, producers, actors, investors. But none of them had the genuine honesty of Henry, a real person. And this authenticity had seeped into Mark. When he arrived home, he didn't even change his clothes. He went to the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, then opened his laptop. He typed into the browser, "Henry Carter Auto Repair Los Angeles." The first result was an old-fashioned website. No flashy slogans or campaigns. Just a simple headline: "Carter's Auto Repair, honest service since 1974. Mark clicked on a few old photos. In the photos was a young Henry. He was standing in front of the garage, holding a wrench, posing proudly. As he scrolled down the page, something caught his eye. Customer reviews, years of heartfelt comments. Mark began reading. "I had no money, my car broke down. Henry fixed it and said, 'Pay me when you can.' I'll never forget how he helped me after a night shift. My father took his car to him for 30 years. When Henry passed away, he fixed our car so we could go to the funeral." Mark's heart tightened. This man wasn't just a mechanic. He was a cornerstone of this neighborhood. But his story hadn't gone beyond these few streets. He leaned against his laptop. His eyes drifted into thought under the dim light of the screen. He hadn't known Henry for even an hour, but he knew one thing for certain. Henry Carter was someone who shouldn't be forgotten, and people like him shouldn't be stuck in the corner of a website. Mark closed the screen. He took a deep breath. He owed Henry something, but it wasn't money. He had already offered him money. Henry had refused. So what could it be? Mark remembered their conversation in the garage. Henry complaining about mechanics who replaced parts, explaining that true craftsmanship lay in slowness, patience, and understanding the machine. And then a voice inside him said, "This isn't about writing a check. This is about leaving a mark." Mark smiled slightly. It was a unique, sincere smile. Yes, he had found something Henry would accept. He put his laptop aside. He picked up his phone. There was someone he needed to call. But just then, his phone vibrated. An unknown number appeared on the screen. Mark paused for a moment, then he answered. The phone vibrated. An unknown number appeared on the screen. Mark paused for a moment, then answered the call. A hesitant voice came from the other end. "Hello, is this Mark Ruffalo?" Mark sat up straight. "Yes. Who am I speaking to?" The voice continued with a deep sigh. "It's Bill. I run the laundromat across from Henry Carter's garage." Mark furrowed his brow. How did this man know him? And why was he calling? "How did you get my number?" he asked, his voice firm but cautious. Bill paused briefly before speaking. "Look, I know this is weird, but I saw you at Henry's shop tonight, and I don't know. I thought you might be the only one who could help." Mark's throat tightened. Something had happened. "What happened, Bill?" The answer was short and to the point. "Henry's in the hospital." Mark felt a chill run through him. He had planned to stop by Henry's garage tomorrow morning, but now he realized it might be too late. He grabbed his coat, took his keys. Some debts couldn't be postponed, and Henry Carter was not a man who deserved to be forgotten. Without a moment's hesitation, he rushed outside. He jumped into his car, started the engine, and merged into the night streets of Los Angeles. There was only one thought in his mind. This isn't just a breakdown. This is about saving a life. When he arrived at Henry's garage, the street was unusually quiet. The windows, which usually let light escape, were now dark. There was a single note neatly taped to the garage door. Mark got out of the car, his footsteps echoing on the pavement. He approached the paper. "Closed indefinitely." A lump formed in his throat. His jaw tightened. So it was true. Henry wasn't here anymore. And this silence didn't feel like a normal closure. At that moment, footsteps behind him turned him around. A man in his late 60s, wearing a worn flannel shirt, stood next to the laundromat across the street. His face was familiar. The man bowed his head slightly. "You're the guy who came last night, aren't you?" Mark nodded slowly. "Bill." The man nodded with a sheepish smile. "Yes. I'm sorry for calling you that, but I thought you should know." Mark's voice trailed off. "What happened?" Bill rubbed his gray beard. "Henry had a stroke the other day while he was working. A customer found him slumped over in the garage. He was having trouble standing." Mark closed his eyes. He remembered that moment, that brief but meaningful moment when Henry had clutched his chest while standing by the Ferrari. Perhaps what he thought he had noticed was what truly needed to be noticed, but he had let it pass in silence. "Where is he now?" he asked, his voice low but the pain inside him sharpening. Bill replied, "County General. He's been there since Monday." Mark bowed his head, then shook it slowly. His eyes drifted to the dark garage. Every shadow behind the windows reminded him of Henry's loneliness. But that loneliness would no longer be his fate. Mark was about to get into his car when Bill's voice came from behind him. "Listen," Bill said, his voice a little hoarse. "I don't know what happened between you and Henry, but that man, he's been keeping this neighborhood together longer than most people have been alive. And now," Mark turned and waited for him. Bill looked away and sighed. "I don't know if he has the strength to fight anymore." Mark's fingers tightened around the car keys in his pocket. Henry had given everything to this shop, to this neighborhood, to the people, to his work. But now when he needed it most, no one was fighting for him. No one had built anything that would allow him to stop and rest. But Mark wouldn't give up. He couldn't just close this chapter of his life. Without saying a word, he got into his car. As soon as he turned the key, the engine roared to life. Mark fixed his eyes on the road and sped away. This wasn't just about fixing a car. It was about protecting a man's honor, his hard work, and his life. Henry didn't want charity, he knew that. But Mark wasn't offering charity either. What he was offering was much more than that. And whether Henry wanted it or not, Mark wasn't leaving this hospital without a plan. Because this wasn't just a visit, it was the beginning of a change. County General Hospital. The corridors smelled sterile, a mix of antiseptic and old coffee. Mark quickened his pace. The sound of his boots hitting the floor echoed. This wasn't a photo shoot. There was no press, no PR team. He was here for Henry Carter. And according to Bill, time wasn't on their side. The nurse at the reception desk blinked when she saw Mark, but only out of duty. He didn't ask for a photo or show any excitement. "I'm looking for Henry Carter," Mark said. "He was admitted a few days ago." The nurse looked at the keyboard, then shook her head. "Room 317, third floor. His condition is stable, but don't expect him to be very talkative." Mark thanked her and walked to the elevator. The word stable was somewhat reassuring, but the phrase not very talkative lingered in his mind. If Henry were okay, he would talk. So things weren't good. The hospital room was dimly lit. There were IVs, monitors, and a silent screen tracking his heartbeat. Henry was lying in bed, weak but still with that familiar determination. Mark stood in the doorway. The man who had made the Ferrari run like a song that night was now lying there silently. Mark cleared his throat, about to step inside, when Henry's eyes opened. With a tired but playful voice, he murmured, "Oh no, is the car broken again?" Mark smiled, bowing his head. Henry was still Henry. He pulled up a chair. "No, it's still running like a dream." Henry sniffed, bringing his hand to his chest. Seeing that movement again, Mark's face grew serious. "How bad is it, Henry?" The old man shrugged slightly. Even he seemed tired as he made the gesture. "The doctors, they say my heart isn't listening to me anymore." His gaze drifted to the ceiling, like a broken engine. "But you can't change that." Mark's jaw tightened. This wasn't just a bad phase. This was serious, and Henry knew it. Mark leaned forward. "Look, Henry, I want to help." Henry sighed with a weary smile. "Son, I know you. You're famous, you're rich, and what you're about to say probably has something to do with money." Mark replied without blinking. "Yes, I want to pay for your treatment." Henry turned his head away. There was an unreadable expression on his face. After a long silence, he shook his head negatively. "I don't take charity, son," he said in a firm voice. Mark looked at him. This wasn't just pride. This was the resolve of a lifetime to stand on one's own 2 feet. Henry had always done everything on his own, and he had no intention of changing now. Mark shook his head slowly. "All right," he said, "you won't take the money, but maybe we can think of something else." He paused for a moment. Then he took a deep breath. "You built something, Henry, and now you're just going to let it close. Is that it?" Henry furrowed his brows. "What are you talking about, Mark?" Mark continued. "The garage, your work, the people you've helped. What will happen to this place when you're gone?" Henry sighed. "I guess it'll close." Mark bowed his head. "Does that feel right to you?" Henry didn't answer, but Mark could see the conflict in his eyes. He leaned forward. "I have an idea." Henry narrowed his eyes. "I'm sure you do," he said sarcastically. Mark smiled slightly. "Just listen to me for once." Henry had spent his life fixing broken pieces, but now Mark was about to fix something for him, and whether Henry liked it or not, this was just the beginning. When Henry was discharged from the hospital, Mark sprang into action. The garage was renovated. The old Carter's Auto Repair sign was taken down. A new sign was hung in its place, teaching the next generation. Henry argued about the name for a long time. "My name doesn't need to be on a building," he said. Mark just smiled. "This isn't a building, Henry. It's a story." Those words silenced Henry. When the garage reopened, many more people showed up than expected. Old customers, curious young people, even children seeing an engine for the first time. They were all there. Some came to see Henry, others to learn something. Mark stood in the back watching Henry, and Henry was still the same as we knew him. He was yelling at the 19-year-old apprentice in anger. "If you're going to fix the car, first learn how to hold the damn tool." Mark let out a quiet laugh. Henry would never change, and that's exactly why things would work out. As he closed the garage door, Henry turned to Mark. His voice was low but sincere. "I think I owe you one, son." Mark grinned. "Number you've already paid me back." Henry furrowed his brow. "How did I manage that?" Mark gestured toward the garage. "Because there's still meaning in teaching you the right way." Henry paused for a moment, then turned his head to look at the new sign. And for the first time in a long time, a genuine spark of pride flashed in his eyes. One afternoon, Henry went outside and looked at the sign once more. The new inscription was now in place. Henry Carter Technical Garage since 1974, and below it, a small line. "Because some things deserve to be done right." Henry smiled. He hadn't planned any of it, but life sometimes brought the most beautiful surprises quietly. And now he knew. This story wasn't over, and it would never be forgotten.